views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I'm Daren, Jaime. We thank you for joining us. If you want to know what the Social Justice Forums are about, well, we're a conversation that talks about the inequities that many people face. We promote civic engagement and give people the opportunity to find out more about the issues. Stay with us. The Social Justice Forums starts right now. And welcome back to the show. As the nation faces a racial revolution, many business leaders are faced with the choice to join the cause or suffer the consequences. Businesses nationwide are confronting the issues of discrimination in the workplace long before the COVID-19 pandemic. Gender, racial, or income gaps were persistent, especially when it comes to achieving decent work and economic opportunities. To combat these issues, businesses had to work towards equity and inclusion for their works despite ethnicity, gender, religion, sexuality, and disability. Social justice initiatives can complement and even accelerate post-pandemic rebuilding. Joining us now to share and provide their point of view on this particular matter, I am joined by senior DEIB and leadership consultant Kevin Michael Slater, who joins us here on the Social Justice Forums. And Kevin, good to have you.
Great to be here, Daren.
Good. And let's get right into it. When we talk about where we are right now, particularly as a country and a nation, there is this racial divide. But then we also know that the gender divide continues as well between women and men, particularly in the employment gap, particularly in the area of income. Talk to us about where you see things right now.
We're finally at intersectionality, where all the bad stuff and the good stuff meet. We're at a certain type of equity of injustice and equity of what people think justice is. So the clarity about it all is really trying to figure out, what do people need? What are the general needs that are intersections and connected? And also recognize that we've been unfair for quite a while in general. The last 4 years have been a have-not conversation. And now what happens is it's caught up, not to quote Malcolm X with the roosters have come home to roost. And you really have to figure out how to divide it up. The gender issues, though, during the COVID are actually even more so. The majority, 8.8% of Black women now unemployed, Hispanic women around 8.8 to 8.9, white women around 7.5, due to the factor of being isolated. We also have to look at those women, in the most part, are essential workers in every type of level you look at, from teaching to nursing to those things that were traditionally gender segregated. And now we've got the case of they're also taking care of family and friends, and therefore being essential workers and not having enough resources. All the entry-level market jobs, such as waiters, servers, food service, all those things, half of those shut down. So when you talk about the income gap, and when you talk about who got hit hardest, people of color and women of color got hit hardest in the pandemic and are least likely right now, even under the new administration, to get their vaccination yet. So we got that big gap. Now, the race relations issue has never really gone away. We just had 4 years of blatant obviousness. You know, just that I don't give a amount. You know, right. It is television, it's got to be careful. But that whole I just don't care aspect has even seeped into spirituality, where people want to debate BLM and debate if they're Marxists, they want to debate about not being hurt or being killed. I don't know how that's debatable, but somehow somebody made that a debatable issue.
Give me a little bit about where we are in terms of today as a culture, though, because there is affirmation. I'm thinking about, some things that are happening right now, and how, people are rising up. I'll take it to the sports world for a minute. You got LeBron James, he's catching hell for, his comments of being politically active. You got the Atlanta Dream, and they now have a new owner now that Kelly Loeffler has sold her share, and she's no longer there. So there are some improvements, I think. But as I said in the lead, it's almost like the culture now is either get with it or suffer the consequences. but there is still some heavy rebellion.
Oh, well, no, the rebellion's great. So let's first point from 1965 to now is a rocky launch. We have to really look at the last 60 plus years, and we always have these bursts of energy. You know, Nat Turner made a burst, Marcus Garvey made a burst, Malcolm X made a burst, Harriet Tubman made a burst, Rosa Parks made a burst, and this is our burst. So these bursts are consistent, but the same thing with these bursts is that we have to have memory and connectivity with it. So yes, athletes and personalities and celebrities and politicians do it, but this time, the difference in this time is grassroots is stronger and the allyship is stronger. And if I had to give a number like I was in sports, we're halfway there. When I was born in 1958, 10% of America liked me or people looking like me. Now I might be at 51% or 50%. We could actually almost have a dashboard about it. The days that being Black is okay, it might be half the time. But let's note some things. If I was watching HGTV the other day, and there was the Boise boys that are in Boise, Idaho, and this group in Laurel, Mississippi called Hometown. I love what they do. The prices are affordable, but could I move there? Could I have the freedom to move to these places that are easy to live as a Black man? And so we still have two big questions on the table. What is freedom and what is safety? Those two big questions, and what is economic empowerment for the third one? Those three questions kind of still keep us in a box. Now, all the major signs are there that say there's movement on all of it. We have more Black male in college than in jail. We have more people seeking education. We have more Black women with education than any other group. We have more people building their own homes. We have more people building their own businesses. We have people cross-culturally learning how to manage it. And it's not a cancel culture, it's a correct culture. See, canceling means I don't have to worry about it anymore. This is pivot and correct. And my son and daughters, my daughter and my sons, they're about correct it, or we're going to find another method to make this happen. They're about the pivot. Where other generations, we were negotiating. And what we're saying is negotiation time is over.
I want to bring two words into the equation: equality and equity. Many times there's confusion. There is this push for equality, but we also understand that equality doesn't always shape up to mean equity. What does it mean?
So this is real simple. There's a cartoon that a lot of people like to use when we talk about equality. Got a fence. We got three people at the fence. They're all three different sizes. Only one of them could see over the fence to see the ball game. Now, that's equal. They're both at the fence. In equality, the people who can't see over the fence get a box. And they get a box so we can all start at the same line. That's equity. The difference about equality is equality doesn't have to be fair. You can be equally miserable. Equity is about what did you put into it? What is the return for it? Based upon our time, our investment, what we put in, and the plus $1 trillion as African Americans we contribute, we have not gotten equity.
When we talk about not getting equity, the question is, how do we repair this now? And I mean, I know I'm talking to the right person here because we've talked about definitely the problems. How can we see solutions advance in real time?
Well, the first thing is our own self-education. One is, my first thing is always stop beating up on each other. You know, I don't care if somebody takes Air Jordans with their stimulus check. They may have waited all their life to have them Air Jordans. Just stop beating up on each other. That would start. And two, let's practice an equal sense of kindness to go like, what do we need and what do we desire? First, find out as a community what your needs are. First, find out if everybody's on the same page about desire. And then find a menu of solutions. Let's not assume with one size fits all. We're over 400 to 1,000 cultures shoved together It's amazing we get along at all. You know, so respect the miracle that is American Blackness. Secondly is to empower cities because people want the cities back. And they want the cities back because they're actually environmentally friendly and much more equitable. All the suburbs are subsidized. Black people are already paying the subsidy for other people. So how about just give us what we're already paying in for? We're not asking for more. Stop acting like it's pie. Stop acting like that white people lose something when we get something. That's a lot. Act like it's an and we can make this better. And if Charmaine can't read and Jose can't read and the Patels can't read, we fix reading. First, look at the big questions. What are we trying to fix? And the biggest thing we need to fix first is economic and healthcare disparities. Because if you're not healthy and you don't have the loot, it's not going to work.
Right. And that's, you know, you're talking about an adult. Let me take it from another perspective of academics. When we talk about academics, there is that huge inequality. We see what the public school system looks like. We see what colleges and universities are looking like. Talk to us from an academic perspective.
Well, here's a funny thing about the pandemic. The pandemic has equalized America. There's nobody getting a great education this year. And in that, we've learned some new things. We learned how to be virtual. We learned that people needed to solve the internet complexity. This, what we're on right now, how you're interviewing me, we have the resources. You and I have the resources. Some folks only have their phone and they don't have a good plan. Some folks don't have anything. And so what we got to recognize is when we actually have not just food deserts, but technology deserts, where you can't have interconnectivity. You can't have it enough. And this is a utility now. So first you got to solve how people get jobs, have jobs, and can have that connectivity. The second thing you got to do with education is realize it's a menu. To stop treating everybody learns the same way. Dr. Kunjufu always talked about boys learn didactically. They need movement. They need all these things to keep going. And I use that information to raise my sons because the information was viable. So stop acting like everybody's going to sit still and figure out the 15 minutes, 20 minutes. When I do adult education, I got to keep moving adults in Zoom every 15 minutes. So why would I expect children to act better than adults? Two, customized education now is at the forefront. We can now customize education, except for some necessary things for in-person learning for people with disabilities, that we can actually make a schedule like a little schoolhouse just for John, just for Jane, just for Jamal, you know, Rashida. We could actually design something for them, keep their interest and move it forward. 3, universities are going to redesign themselves. Because right now, parents are not going to pay you $80,000 to have juniors still downstairs playing video games. You know, we got some realities here. And 4, we have to realize we got this opportunity to just show brilliance by our innovation. We now can open back up things slowly where people go to learning centers and they go for the gap closing, not for what they don't need help on, but what the things they need most help on. But choosing to treat everyone the same after this pandemic is kind of not only immature, it's silly. We can fix stuff even at a lower cost now. Think about how much travel time's been saved between you and I, and if I had to come to your studio, and if we had to do everything, or me having, I work in 3 cities every day. I work in Washington, I work in Boston, and I work in Florida. I can't do that in a day anyway. So we can use this technology to improve education, give out more things. And I want to say this about Black authors right now, and all authors of color. I've bought more books in the pandemic than I have in a long time. And I will say that people are writing on it, people having voice, people are trying to get that out there. And there's not any reason our young people don't know this right now, unless we're not introducing that. Mm-hmm. And the city of Newark even gave away books with Scholastic, free books to kids during the entire pandemic. Audible gave out actually tablets to kids. because they're headquartered in Newark. I only live like 5 minutes from Newark, New Jersey. I grew up there. So we got people who are willing to go that extra mile now, but we need to, as a community, recognize that part of it, we have to be ready to educate our children. I sound so, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. We got to educate our own children, and we have to make sure that the supplies we need come from the infrastructure. I don't need the cities to worry about my moral education for my children. That's my responsibility. I need them to have the structural education of sciences and math and STEM and the music and the arts and expression.
So, and I don't, not to cut you, I want to ask a question about, looking at that, right? And looking at all that you just mentioned, I want to bring COVID-19 into a factor, right? Does this make things, does it make the gap widen? Or are we going to see some things become a little bit better as a result of this pandemic when it comes to the area of education, employment, and closing and bridging the gap?
Depends on where you are. So there are two brothers called the Blackman Brothers, and they're white sociologists, and they made America 5 countries. And you and I, we, for lack of a better word, we live in Cuomoville. I'm outside in New York City, you're in New York City, and so therefore we wait for the Andrew idiot. And I've worked with Andrew before, so I can say that, I know about his mean side too. But the whole case, Cuomo and Phil, they get together and say, this is what's good for this folks. And most of us, by the way, benefited from that structure because our numbers going down, everything else going. Now, I work in other states where Texas is like nothing happened. So, will things get better where people paid attention? Yes. Will things get better in Florida? Not sure. And the reason I say not sure is that they're up on vaccines, but they're not necessarily up on structural behavior. So the problem is we still need structure. And what we have right now is kind of the wild, wild west after the pandemic. The last 4 years made America feral. It made it seem like, and I'll use how I define feral. You can feed a stray cat every day out the back of your door, right? Mm-hmm. And you can feed it for a month. And one day you go to pet it and it'll still scratch you. Feralness is not being used to being treated well. And when people are feral, no matter what their politics, they need a lot more trust than normally is issued. Until we get a certain level of trust in these dialogues, it's going to be difficult for people to trust it. And I'll use a vaccine as a great example. The average Black person already has 5 to 6 vaccines in their body right now. But they want to go all the way back to Mariella to Lax, and they want to go all the way back to Tuskegee experiment. And I get all that. But as a person who's been in 15 clinical trials that actually have been on respiratory, that have saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of asthmatics that were also Black, as a person who studied those clinical trials, I can assure you that there are tons of Black scientists and white scientists and Asian scientists and Latin scientists and gay scientists and, atheist scientists and religious scientists, all trying to get us to not be stupid. And yet we forget all that. There's a problem with the notion of what we trust. And until we learn to trust even a little bit more, that the greater good is important, until we get almost hyper moral, but yet wide open. And what I mean by that is I want everyone to live, but I don't want to judge how people live. I want you to live. I want you to be productive, but I don't have a right to judge necessarily your quote unquote lifestyle. You're a human being, live. We're at that critical point. If we were a science fiction movie, we'd be sitting there worried about, the virus is our enemy. And we should do everything to do that. And we're not doing that. And so, yes, there will be advances. LA is a good example. There's a clinic in LA that is doing everything to get everybody the vaccine. You know, all the review boards, on every review board nationally, they said it should go to the homeless and the people who are doing our everyday delivery, the essential worker. You know, being in the supermarket was an essential worker this year. The equity between a supermarket worker and somebody in a hospital is the first time. They're on par together. Now, does that mean people will treat it that way? I don't know about you, but people who take care of my food, they're important.
Right.
I'm a 300-pound man. That's not a joke. We got an equalizer, but will we learn from it? And I will say in certain places, yes. In other places, the denial is still harmful. Does that make sense, Daren?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we wrap up the segment, I want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about your work and where people can find out some of the work that you're working on and be connected.
Sure. One of the reasons I got invited to do this is I work on a project with Bernadette Pleasant on the Emotional Institute, and there's a website for that. And I help partner with her on 400 years of anti-racism, a course on anti-racism where we work for 8 weeks on having people from all over the world chime in with us for 2 hours at a time in that 8 weeks. And we also have Reading with Roz, where we read books like My Grandmother's Hands, and we're looking at caste. We have reading groups. We have coffee with Kevin on Saturday morning. And if it's a bad week, on Wednesday nights, we have bourbon with Kevin. So it depends on what it is, where you have dialogue and discussion. We also have a Facebook page and a website at the Emotional Institute to do that. So that's how I got to here. I'm also working on developing leadership initiatives in Washington and working with leaders on how to integrate in government a very balanced way of looking at it. And then I'm also working with restaurants in Boston and Washington to make sure that they're equitable, especially during the pandemic, on how they take care of people. And then working on some articles for the Harvard Business Review with some people. I've been busy in here.
Yes.
I've been on a lot of panels lately. I advised the Village of Wellington in Florida and Palm Beach on being proactive, not reactive, about designing the future of inclusive belonging. And my target for everyone is belonging. It's not even about taking sides. I want to know what would make you feel like you belong and how do we get there? Because until we can get to that level of trust, we're going to have problems.
Yeah. A lot that you're working on. And certainly we thank you for being with us and sharing. Got to bring you back so we can get to this conversation.
Sure.
And probably, in a little while, look and see how far we've come.
Always here for you. Stay safe, my friends, and be well.
All right. Stay safe. Kevin Michael Slater, thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forum. We're going to take a quick break. We got more show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back in a few.
There's a special election on Tuesday, March 23rd, and if you live in any of these neighborhoods, you'll want to pay attention. Your councilman, Andrew Cohen, is now a judge, and there are 5 candidates looking to replace him. Whoever wins on March 23rd will join New York City's primary lawmaking body, making decisions that affect you, your family, your home, and even your workplace. Starting in 2021, New York City will use ranked choice voting in primary and special elections for local offices. Ranked choice voting simply means that voters can rank up to 5 candidates in order of preference, instead of casting a vote for just one. You can still vote for just one candidate if you prefer. You can learn everything there is to know about the District 11 City Council race and the candidates by visiting ballotpedia.org and riverdalepress.com. Stay informed, and most importantly, make sure you mail your absentee ballot the day before Election Day on March 23rd, or safely head out to the polls to have your vote count and your voice heard.
And welcome back to the show. Millions of Americans could actually face eviction under President Joe Biden's executive order extending federal protections for renters through March 31st. Nearly 40 million Americans have been protected by some form of an eviction moratorium since the onset of COVID-19's pandemic. Public health officials argued the moratorium was necessary since individuals impacted by the pandemic would have been evicted, forcing them into shelters and further risking the spread of COVID-19. However, the question remains on many renters' minds is what will happen after the rent moratorium when they're still responsible for their rent payments. Joining us now to share their point of view on this matter, I'm joined by the activist and president of Kingsman Films Incorporated, Tony Lindsay. And Tony, good to have you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you. We'll get right at it because when we do talk about renters, obviously there is this reprieve through this moratorium, but we do know that every good thing must come to an end in terms of this. And when we look, a lot of people say, listen, even though this moratorium will be is enacted when it's lifted, I could possibly still be on the street. I know that's a great concern for you too.
Well, I think that what we've been lacking is nuance in this conversation, because while I understand, we all understand that some form of a reprieve is needed for tenants, but I think we're kind of missing out on what's happening to the landlords in this situation as well. One thing that we're missing from the conversation is that the moratorium isn't exempting homeowners from making mortgage payments the way that, and I know they say that they're not exempting tenants from making their rent payments, but that's essentially what's happening. And when it comes to the landlords, they're still going to have to make those payments, whether it's deferred to the end of the moratorium or in some cases to the back end of the loan. We can't forget that they still have to pay that money. But in places like New York City, where the landlord-tenant court, it's pretty much a tenant court. People can really, like the tenants, unfortunately, usually get to walk away without paying any rent whatsoever. And it takes a very long process to evict them and remove them from the properties. So, I think that's a major problem that we're not considering, because we've been treating through this legislation, we've been treating all landlords as if they're just, these multi-millionaire billionaires with massive resources. But it's like we're forgetting about like the mom and pop landlords, the smaller landlords, the people who own 2 and 3 family homes who still go to work, but they need their rental income to stay above water. Like, so what about those people? We're forgetting about that. So we have to be careful when we cape for some of these policies, because at the end of the day, you cannot help one group at the expense of another group.
Right. And I've talked with lawyers on this show. We've had that conversation talking about how it seems as though almost the court system is pro-renter and the landlord seems to be the one that's going to end up with the short end of the stick, and they still got to come up with money.
Yeah.
Some of them don't get the PPP that's out there. And so you're really in a place of really trying to figure out where am I going to be able to go from here? So needless to say, there are some loopholes that are in this. What would you like to see to kind of like tighten up these loopholes?
Well, okay. Well, there are like some really ridiculous loopholes. Like one thing that we're seeing is where we have there's a hardship declaration form that tenants can sign, if they're experiencing hardship. So basically what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to fill out the hardship form, give it to your landlord or give it to the courts, and that's supposed to exempt you from being evicted for the duration of the moratorium. Let's remember, this moratorium has lasted, it's been a year now. And I know you said March earlier, but it's really up until May that we're at right now, and potentially even further than that. So that declaration form, it's extremely vague in the language, and it leaves the door open for people who do have the money to pay, the people who are working, the people who haven't been impacted. It leaves the door open for them to not pay their rent as well. And we know that that's something that is happening. So when Governor Cuomo was asked about this, like, what do the mom and pop landlords do when they have tenants who have been in there, many of them who weren't even paying rent before the pandemic,
right?
They're taking advantage of this moratorium right now. What do we do? What about all of those smaller landlords who are struggling to stay above water? What can they do? And, Governor Cuomo's answer was, it was a milquetoast, lukewarm, and I found it, really dismissive answer. he said what he said, the law is the law. And the fact is, you can't claim hardship if you weren't paying your rent before the pandemic. But that's exactly what's happening if you read the language of the hardship letter. And I actually have a quick, I don't know if you have the time, I can give you a quick excerpt from it.
Please go ahead. Yes.
Right, just to show you. Okay, so we know basically the purpose of the hardship letter is to, save people from being evicted because of the COVID pandemic. So it says, this is the box that you'll check. These are the options that you check as a tenant who's experiencing hardship. I'm experiencing financial hardship and I'm unable to pay my rent or other financial obligations for one or more of the following reasons. One, significant loss of household income during the COVID-19 pandemic. Two, increase in necessary out-of-pocket expenses related to performing essential work or related to health impacts during the COVID-19 pandemic. Three, it's about childcare. And four, moving expenses and difficulty. I have securing alternative housing. Make it a hardship for me to relocate to another residence during the COVID-19 pandemic. Isn't it pretty hard for anyone to, to find alternative housing and cover moving expenses during this pandemic? See, this language is very vague. And it also says other circumstances related to COVID-19 pandemic have negatively affected my ability to obtain meaningful employment. Okay, so if you go through that language, you see that it's very easy to find a windfall based off of the subject to interpretation type of window to get in there. So I just think it needs to be far more specific, because also while Governor Cuomo says, okay, they can't do this, they can still be evicted if they were not paying their rent before the pandemic. But how can that happen when all evictions have been stayed? How can that happen when the city marshal is basically closed and they say that they cannot enforce and carry out any evictions? So his answer was basically, you're on your own.
Mm-hmm. So talk to me about the poor and the middle class, because obviously when you talk about this, they're the ones that are really going to be predominantly hit too.
Right. I mean, you see, there are significant costs that are incurred as a landlord in this city, where most of the residential landlords are in fact middle class and by definition, poor people. So what about the elderly people who are finding themselves facing imminent homelessness because they choose, to make a little rental income to supplement their tiny Social Security income? Many longtime property owners in this city can't even afford the cost to live in this city, and that's what drives them to rent the spaces in their homes in the first place. And that falls squarely in the lap, in my opinion, that falls squarely in the lap of this mayor and the previous two administrations. There's been a lot of reckless budgetary spending. We had the Thrive NYC program. So I feel like there's been a lot of recklessness when it comes to the budget. And even though, the whole country has been reeling from the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, there's also been a lot of reckless spending that needs to be addressed. I mean, we have issues like, why are we spending $6 billion in policing instead of dedicating more financial resources from that budget to the social and the health programs that are needed to even mitigate the circumstances of crime in this city? You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of wasteful spending, and there needs to be more money that is allocated to these landlords, mostly smaller landlords who just can't afford to survive right now. They still have to pay utilities. They still have to maintain these properties where people are living for free, and there are a lot of expenses that landlords incur. So what are they supposed to do when they're forced to sit for a year and a half with no money? I mean, you can see stories everywhere. There's a story about a 94-year-old man in Brooklyn. He had a tenant that wasn't paying rent. I guess he wasn't paying for like 2 years. The guy, he finally got an eviction order for the tenant to be removed in April of last year. But then the COVID pandemic happened and they did the moratorium. So that same guy who was supposed to be evicted in April of last year is just sitting back, relaxing for free in that 94-year-old man's house. And he's like back $50,000 in rent. There's another story about an elderly Black man. He bought, I think, a 10-family unit back in the 60s. He has his tenants in there. No one's paying because of the moratorium. And he himself is facing eviction where he lives because he's not getting any rents from the tenants in the property that he has. So people are being forced. I mean, as homeowners, I'm a homeowner, I'm a property owner, and I'm also a landlord myself. And it's like, when you sit back and you look at this, it's like we saw this huge upward transfer of wealth, the largest we've ever seen in this country, take place when Congress passed that original so quote unquote stimulus package that gave trillions of dollars to these corporations. Remember, through this pandemic, the wealthiest people in this country, their wealth has increased precipitously. But everyone else, their wealth and their people are facing poverty, homelessness. So, while they did that, we're debating on whether people should get like a one-time $1,400 check. So in New York City, it's kind of like, the way it seems to me is like Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo, they're trying to follow that model of this new upward transfer of wealth. Why do I say that? Because if you look at the real estate trends, you'll see that there are a lot of empty businesses now. Like, there's a lot of available real estate that you're going to see in New York City very soon at the end of this, because I think like 50% or more of small businesses have been decimated. About 50% of restaurants, they're not coming back. So there's a lot of real estate. And then when it comes to, these residential property owners, most of them, they can't afford to live here anymore. We're being squeezed out. So most people are going to be forced to sell their properties for pennies on the dollar. So who is going to be able to grab up these properties? So I think, the way people in poorer communities, we just see this as just another way of facilitating mass gentrification of New York City and pushing poor people out.
Yeah, I was looking at some statistics while you were talking with reference to this. And one of the things that came up is the amount of people, particularly African Americans and communities of color, that will face a backlog as landlords in the court system, given the fact that there's already a huge delay in the court system. If you're ever going to get your just due for equity, it seems like it's not going to happen right away, because you already have an existing backlog. Now you're adding these new cases, which potentially could mean people will ultimately lose out and lose their businesses and potentially lose their homes too.
Right. And we have to remember, this boils down to something that it's twofold, the expenses for the landlord. See, our expenses are twofold, because not only are landlords providing maintenance and utilities for people who are living in their houses for free, but when the landlords go to court, they have to find additional monies to pay for legal representation, while free legal representation is going to be offered to the tenants. So I don't know. Well, to the people who have experience in, housing court and landlord tenant court, most people know that usually these evictions, they end in settlements. And these settlements are usually where the landlord ends up agreeing to pay the tenants a nuisance fee, basically to get them out quickly. That's literally extortion. That is literally extortion. So you not only have the cost, you have a landlord, small property owners who have been impacted by the pandemic. Many of them have lost their jobs. So they've also lost their rental income on top of that. They also have to incur all of the financial responsibility of maintaining properties where tenants are living for free. And then when they finally allow the eviction processes to return, Now you're going to be stuck in court for many more months, spending potentially thousands upon thousands of dollars to get a tenant out of the property who basically, in many cases, you may have to pay them to leave. And I'm not trying to castigate tenants because I understand that a lot of people are being impacted, and tenants, they definitely do need help. But like I said earlier, you cannot help one group at the expense of another, and you cannot paint this situation with one broad brush, because you are going to find a multitude of people, as we see now, who are taking advantage of this situation. And unfortunately, New York City has the worst laws and procedures as it pertains to eviction, the eviction process in this country, meaning that it is extremely biased in favor of tenants and promotes people squatting and remaining in properties without paying any rents. And this always leads to property owners having to forfeit their properties because they cannot afford the cost. So, you know, I just want people to understand that there's a lot of nuance to this conversation, and there's never going to be a situation where you can find one broad solution for everyone, because a lot of landlords are really hurting. So perhaps rather than just saying they don't have to pay and, you know, they will still have to continue to pay, why haven't we been discussing some sort of a voucher system or some real tangible rent relief where where money is provided to the tenants to be able to pay their rents during this time? Why is no one talking about that? Why? Because that responsibility, it relieves the city of a certain level of accountability, but it's going to come back and visit them again, because the cost, you're going to see homelessness skyrocket in the coming year, although it has already skyrocketed under Mayor Bill de Blasio. We're seeing homelessness and the mentally ill out on the streets. It's ridiculous. That's why it's at an all-time high. So imagine how this problem will be exacerbated once the courts reopen and people are now, a lot of these property owners who were facing foreclosure and repossession, the clock is started on that again. Remember, so now the clock restarts on that. And unfortunately, a lot of those people, had they been receiving rents during the past year and up to potentially a year and a half when it's over, they likely would have been able to save their properties. But this legislation has guaranteed that they are going to lose their properties. And there was already, from what I heard, a landmark decision that was made just recently in Kings County Supreme Court, where it's going to make it very difficult for people to appeal these foreclosure actions. Yeah. So we really need to pay attention to what's going on here, because, you know, when it comes to, you know, this massive push to tell everyone, hey, we're going to save you, don't pay rent, we're really destroying an entire group of people. People lose their properties, someone's going to come right back in and they're going to get rid of you anyway.
Right. Tony, we got to leave it there. Great conversation. Thank you for sharing with us here on the Social Justice Forums, and we'll be bringing you back soon.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All righty. And listen, we want you to stay with us. We do have more show. Don't go anywhere. The Social Justice Forums. We'll be right back. welcome back. Moms of Black Boys United is an organization of over 150,000 mothers across America and abroad who are focused on influencing policy and perception, impacting how Black boys and men are treated by law enforcement. The purpose of the organization is to organize and mobilize moms and women who are primary caretakers of Black sons for progressive social change, as well as providing them to share their concerns, fears, anxieties, and hopes, and to propose solutions to very real challenges our children face in surviving and thriving in America. Joining us now to provide their point of view on the matter, I'm joined by the Executive Director of Moms of Black Boys United, Vanessa McCullers, and we thank you so much for joining us, Vanessa.
Thank you so much.
No worries. I know that image is everything, and when it comes to talking about our young Black boys, we want to see that they're given the proper perspective. Talk to us about the work of your organization.
Sure. So I appreciate you kind of sharing, yes, that perception is everything. We do believe that it really starts with the way that our sons are perceived. So since the organization started, we've been looking at different ways in which to show that our boys are just that. They're caring and loving. We want everyone to be able to see them through our proud eyes. So we've done a couple of different campaigns that speak to that, one of which is the Protect Them campaign, which was an image-based campaign showing images of pictures of moms and their sons, embracing their sons, and hopefully stirring the pot of empathy so that people will realize that our sons are just like theirs. They're just like their white counterparts, and they all deserve the ability to survive.
I know part of what you do through your organization is also provide support for mothers, and that's very important to you. Share with us a little bit about the work that you're doing in providing that support for mothers.
Sure. One of the things that we do to provide support for moms is simply by providing the space on Facebook, which is a safe space for them to communicate with each other about their trials and tribulations and even their celebrations of their sons. But beyond that, to be able to give them a place where they can go for information, a place that they can go for resources. We've created a database on our website that actually allows moms to find providers in the space of educational assistants, so educational advocates. In the case of medical assistants, looking for doctors or even those who work in the emotional or mental health areas, doctors that work with different children with special needs, and then also equally, if not more importantly, in the areas of criminal justice, looking at attorneys and people who provide work at a discounted rate for our moms and for moms of Black boys. That database lives on our website. It is something that is a work in progress for us. We've finished the state of New York. We're working on the state of California next, and we hope that in the years to come we can provide that as a space where moms can go to help them navigate the systems that typically oppress our sons.
So mothers are on the front line a lot. They're front and center in the lives of children. They're front and center for a lot of the activism that goes on. When you look at moms on the front line, what comes to mind?
Well, moms on the front line simply is, mothers that are looking at not just how they care for their sons within their household, but the things that they need to do to create change and to implement accountability where there typically isn't accountability. We are standing in the balance for our sons so that they understand that there are certain systems that need to be put in place so that our boys are treated fairly and equitably, number one, and that number two, those who are meant to provide service and protect them do just that. And if they don't, if they hurt our sons, if they harass our sons, and if they, God forbid, kill our sons, that they are held accountable for their misdoings.
As you look at moms on the front line, talk to us about your audience. How are you able to get your moms, and what moms do you have?
Wow. Well, when the organization or when the Facebook group first started, it was an emergence of moms coming from everywhere, most of whom had seen the the traumatic killings of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, and their, Philando's mom, who was so stoic in addressing what had happened to her son. I think that it was, every mom feels for others the way they feel for their sons, their own sons. And it was just a natural progression of moms that wanted to join in on the conversation. Bringing them to the front line is a little bit of a different story, because that is where we look at moms from a local level. Each area has its own issues that they deal with. Each area has an ability to address them locally. So we created chapters so that moms could really connect with each other locally, and then step up to the front line as a united force to speak to their regional legislatures and policymakers that would affect the lives that their own sons live day to day.
And I know your organization did something very special for moms on the front line during Black History Month. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so we wanted to kind of pay homage to the moms that came before us and paved the way. And we created some content that really shared some of the moms that were, instrumental in moving this movement along. Moms that were a part of the civil rights movement, moms that were a part of the history of just protecting our sons. So whether it be Emmett Till's mom and her decision to show her son as who he was, or Tupac Shakur's mom and her resistance to, to the movement that was happening at that time, we thought that our place in this world really comes from the work that they have already done and the path that they had already paved.
So as we move forward towards the future, give us a little bit about how you see things playing out, particularly with mothers and some of the work that you're doing.
Sure. Well, for moms of Black boys, I think we are still honing in on the conversation of changing the perception of our sons. So recently, we started a new initiative called Son Stories. And the idea is that we're allowing our sons to, or really not allowing, but providing a platform for them to share how they feel, what it's like to grow up as a Black boy or a young Black man in America from their own voice. So whether that be through the fine arts, or whether it be through spoken word or hip hop or song, we want them to feel comfortable sharing in their own voice what it's like for them. So we're providing that platform and spreading that wide. Outside of that, we are making sure that our moms are taking care of themselves and speaking to self-care. We realize that in order for us to be able to take care of others, we absolutely have to take care of ourselves. And we are definitely working on creating strategic partnerships with other organizations that are in the fight, the same fight that we are. And maybe their lens might be different. Maybe they're speaking more to intersectionality. But the point of the matter is that we're all a part of this struggle, and we want to work together and provide a united front, because we believe firmly that if we move forward as a united front, that we will be able to make the changes that are needed to protect our sons.
You talked about the deaths, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling. We can go on, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. And from a mother's perspective, what was that like for you? And I'll go into more in another example, talking about George Floyd, a man who actually was crying out for his mother. For you, from that perspective, how does that hit you?
Well, Daren, to be honest with you, my involvement in the organization stemmed from the fact that my son had a very traumatic response to the killings of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. He was 18 at the time that he saw it via social media, and it really affected him in a very dramatic way. He became a recluse. This was a young man who was, out and about with his friends all the time, but seeing what happened to Alton Sterling and Philando Castile really made him realize that in a lot of ways they aren't safe. Our sons, our husbands, our brothers, our sisters are not necessarily safe traveling the streets. And so he stayed home. in the cases of George Floyd, where he called out for his mom, or even in Ahmaud Arbery, where she wailed at the death of her son. Wanda, who we have been in communication with, it's just, there is nothing that is more gut wrenching than hearing a mother wail for the life of her son. It touches me and it triggers something in me that I think most moms feel. All it does is make me fight harder. All it does is strengthen my resolve. What it does is it makes me more committed to the fight for protecting my own son, yes, but also the sons of moms all across this country. I look at all of them as my nephews, even the ones that have put themselves in situations where they are now incarcerated. Every life of every Black son, boy, man, it's all valuable. All their lives matter to me. And so, if anything, I will just continue to fight, because this is not something that is going to change in 10 years. We've had these issues for hundreds of years. It's going to take a lot of work to change the course of action, and I'm here for it.
Do you feel like the pandemic has made mothers stronger, or has it been a little bit more fractured because of the lack of socialization and isolation?
Daren, we are Black women, and I don't think there is any stronger human species alive than the Black woman. This pandemic has shown our strength more than any other time, and it's shown our resolve. And I think that, if anything, it has made us definitely stronger, if that was possible, than we were before. It definitely has also shown that there are ways in which we can be vulnerable. But I think that one of the blessings of MOBB United and of being a Black woman is that there is an unspoken of sisterhood that allows us to provide strength to each other.
So for people who want to get in touch with you, how do they go about doing that?
Well, they can visit us at mobbunited.org. That's MOBB United.org. We're also on Facebook, obviously, in our private group, which they can request to join. They can also follow us on Instagram or on Twitter, where we speak a lot about the issues that plague our sons from the justice system.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us and being here with us on the Social Justice Forums. Great to have you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
All righty. Well, that about wraps it up for this edition of the Social Justice Forums. I want to thank you for joining us. Be sure to tune in next week as we continue to elevate the conversation, promote civic engagement, and then address many of the issues that people are facing that sometimes we just don't know about. I'm Daren Jaime saying thank you for watching. We'll catch you next week here on the Social Justice Forum.